This presentation covers Chapter 7 of the textbook. It's all about establishing table structures. First, a quick refresher on terminology. Entity is another word for table, and attribute is another word for field. Do you remember in the last presentation we covered some of the material in Chapter 6, and it explained how to exhaustively make sure that you account for all of the fields you will need. They could come from interviews, data entry forms, or reports, but you have to get them all before you finalize any tables. Here are some guidelines for table names. Number 1, you create a unique, descriptive name that is meaningful to the entire organization. You create a name that is accurately, clearly, and unambiguously identifies the subject of the table. Miscellaneous is a horrible table name. It's not specific enough. Use the minimum number of words necessary to convey the subject of a table. So everyone in the organization should be able to identify what the table represents. Be concise, but not too concise. For example, TD_1 is too short and not descriptive. Multi-use vehicle maintenance equipment is too long and could be shortened to equipment. Do not use words that convey physical characteristics. Avoid using words such as file, record, and table. It just adds confusion. Do not use acronyms or abbreviations. Example, SC could stand for Solutions Consultant, Systems Configuration, Steering Committees, etc. Do not use proper names or other words that will unduly restrict the data that can be entered into the table. An example of this would be if you had a table called Southwest Region Employees, it would restrict how you would treat employees from other regions. Do not use a name that identifies more than one subject. Examples would be department or branch, facility/building, or miscellaneous again also implies more than one product or more than one subject. Use the plural of the name. However, not everyone agrees with this. So are these good or bad table names? Take a look. So I've underlined the ones that I think are pretty good. What's wrong with work? What does it mean? It's ambiguous. Miscellaneous is ambiguous. Meaning, ambiguous means it's unclear what it means. Dates, same thing, ambiguous. What kind of date? Is it an order date? Is it a ship date? Is it an employee start date? Client meetings is good. TD1 we talked about is too short. It's not very descriptive. People who see that are going to wonder, what is that table about? Multi-use vehicle maintenance equipment is too long. Equipment is good. Patient record uses record in the name. It could refer to patients, doctors, or examinations. SC we talked about. It's an acronym, and it's open to multiple meanings. System configurations, that's a good name. Pacific Northwest Employees. It restricts future growth. What happens when you hire people in the Southwest or the Northeast? Facility building conveys more than one subject. So make it a table for facilities and make it a table for building. And employees is a good table name. Chapter 7 of the textbook also identifies best practices in naming fields. They are essentially the same as the best practices for naming tables. So you create a unique descriptive name that is meaningful to the entire organization. The name should appear only once in the entire database, unless it is used to establish a relationship between tables. You create a name that accurately, clearly, and unambiguously identifies the characteristic a field represents. Phone number is ambiguous. As an example, what phone number? Be specific. To resolve generic names, you can add the table name or abbreviated table name as a prefix to the field name. An example would be address in the employee table becomes employee address or EMP address. Use the minimum number of words necessary to convey the characteristic the field represents. Hired is too short. Date that the employee was hired is too long. Date hired is just right. Do not use acronyms, and use abbreviations judiciously. Do not use words that could confuse the meaning of the field name. Example, digital identification code number would be better as identification code or identification number. Do not use a name that identifies more than one characteristic. Examples, area or location, phone/fax. Those should be separate fields. And finally, use the singular form of the name. So, are these good or bad field names? Again, I've highlighted the ones that I think are pretty good. Phone number is ambiguous. Which phone? Home phone is obvious. That's a good field name. Address, ambiguous. Which address? Is it home address, work address? Employee address is good. EMP address is good. CAD_SW uses acronyms, which not everyone knows. So, not a good field name. Hired is too short. Date that the employee was hired is too long. Area/location implies more than one characteristic. Should be a separate field. And skills is plural. Should use singular. So elements of the ideal field represents a distinct characteristic of the table. A table represents a specific subject, which can be an object or event. The ideal field represents a distinct characteristic of that object or event. The ideal field contains a single value. So don't have multi-valued fields. An example would be in one field, courses taken, BizIT 103, DBA, DBA 130. There you're having multiple values in the same field. That's a no-no. The ideal field cannot be deconstructed into smaller components. So no multi-part fields. Address would be an example. If you have 123 Mockingbird Lane, Bellevue, Washington, 98007, you have the street address, you have the city, you have the state, you have the zip code. Those should all be in separate fields. The ideal field should not contain a calculated or concatenated value. A field should not have to depend on the values of other fields for its own value. Because if you do that, it's really hard and burdensome to update. And the ideal field should be unique to the database, except for linking fields. You try and avoid redundancy. Having no duplicates makes it easier to update the database. So, what do you think of this table? Are there any issues with it? One problem is that it has multi-part fields. So this first field, instructor name, has a first name and last name. Those should be two separate fields. The address, instructor address, has a street, a city, a state, and a zip code. Those should all be separate fields. So you need to split them up into separate fields, just like I've shown here in this picture. Anything else wrong with this table? Yeah, it has multi-valued fields. So we've got one field here called classes taught. And I've got multiple values in the field. You can usually identify these because the field name might be plural, and the field may actually have more than one value in it, separated by commas or slashes or something else. So the problem with this is it makes it difficult to retrieve information for a specific value, and it makes it hard to sort the data in a meaningful fashion. So the first instinct might be to create separate fields. Classes taught 1, class taught 2, class taught 3. The problem with this approach is that it makes it hard to retrieve the class taught. There's no really way to sort meaningfully, and it restricts how many classes you can capture. If you add more class taught fields, you make the first 2 points worse, i.e. retrieving data and sorting. So this might be your first instinct, but don't do this. So the solution is to remove the field from the table. Here we've removed class taught, and use it as a basis for a new table. And then you use a field from, or fields, in this case instructor name, instructor last name, from the original table to relate the original table to the new table. You know, this introduces some redundancy, but it's minimal. So this is actually the preferred solution. And finally, the elements of an ideal table. We've harped on this a bit, but it represents a single subject, which can be an object or an event. It has a primary key. This is important for 2 reasons. A primary key uniquely identifies each record within a table, and it plays an important role in establishing table relationships. The ideal table does not contain multi-part or multi-valued fields. It does not contain calculated fields. It does not contain unnecessary duplicate fields. And it contains a minimum of redundant data. That's it for this video.